In this video, we are going to talk about types of levers. The advantage of doing this is we can often describe the human body as a series of levers, and therefore it's good to know what type of levers there are. There are three classes of levers, and I'm going to go through them, and I'm going to use this basic setup to describe each lever system. I'm going to draw a lever arm. I'm going to draw this triangle representing the axis of rotation, or fulcrum, and then I'm going to draw two forces, one that is tending to cause rotation and one that's resisting rotation. So Fm for motive force, and the other called Fr for resistance force. I've got those labeled right here in the notes. So this is the force trying to cause rotation, and this would be the force resisting rotation. Right? And I'm going to draw the three class levers using these three parts: the axis, the motive force, and the resistance force. The first class lever is set up the way I just drew it, where I have the lever arm, the axis rotation, I have the resistance force here, and the motive force here. So these two forces are on opposite sides as the axis of rotation. All right, so we have this orientation of those three parameters: resistance force, axis, motive force. These can be on either side. You can switch these, but the forces are on opposite sides of the axis rotation. Lots of good mechanical examples out in the world. I'll draw one that's easy: the teeter-totter. I hope I spelled that right. Teeter-totter. Two kids sitting on a teeter-totter that goes up and down. Here's the axis of rotation. For purposes of this discussion, one of those kids would be identified as the motive force causing rotation, and the other would be considered a resisting force or resisting rotation. So that's a nice mechanical example. In the human body, there's not a lot of first-class levers. I'm going to draw one here, and I'm going to explain it a little bit. This is a person, and the third class lever is, the example I'm going to use is elbow extension. So I'm going to take the elbow, I'm going to put it up in this position, and I'm going to look at the tricep, which inserts on the electron process. And then if I hold a weight in my hand, that would be a resistance force. And the electron process and the weight are actually on opposite sides of the axis of rotation. Okay? So now, as this creates rotation, the weight will cause resistance, and they're on opposite sides of the axis of rotation. Right? And that's a first-class lever. That's different than if I do elbow extension here, where I may actually be resisting elbow extension by using the bicep brachii as opposed to actively contracting the triceps. That's why I have to hold my hand up over my head. So let me explain what I have here. I've got the forearm right here. I've got the upper arm right here. This is the person's head. That's their nose looking this way. And we're going to go through elbow extension. So we're going to go in that direction. You see I drew out the forearm out here. This would be the olecranon process. And the tricep brachii inserts on the olecranon process. That insertion is on this side of the axis of rotation. So the line of pull of the muscle will represent the force, and that's going to be the motive force. That's the axis rotation, and this weight out here will represent the resistance force, Fr. So now I have that same setup: resistance force, axis of rotation, and motive force, and that's a first-class lever. There are not a lot of first-class levers in the human body. Another one that I often use is just nodding yes. In that case, the muscles on the anterior aspect, when I go from this position to this position, the anterior aspect will be causing the action, so that will be the motive force, and then the muscles on the posterior side will contract eccentrically and provide resistance, and so those muscles would represent the resistance force. So that would be another example, with the axis of rotation being right at the subcondylar bone, condylar bone, and that would be therefore an example of a first-class lever. Okay, second-class lever. In this example, I draw the lever system a little different. I have the lever arm here. I've got the axis rotation at one end of the lever arm. And then I have the resistance force in between the axis and the motive force. All right, so the motive force is all the way out here. I've got the resistance force and the axis rotation, so I have that set up. Axis, resistance force, motive force. There's lots of good examples in the mechanical world for second-class levers, and I'll use the wheelbarrow as an example. Here's the wheel, axis of rotation. Whatever's in the bucket is the weight or the resistance to using the wheelbarrow. And then if I'm using the wheelbarrow, I would grab the hands of the wheelbarrow and I would lift up. So this would be the motive force, this would be the resistance force, and this being the axis of rotation. So now I have this orientation of these three parameters, which is the same as here. So this is a second-class lever. Second-class lever. That's a good mechanical example. Oddly enough, there are not a lot of good examples of second-class levers in the human body. There's some textbooks that do explain some, maybe standing on your toes. They're actually wrong, and I'm not going to draw one here because it is not a correct second-class level. So I'm going to skip over anatomical examples of a second-class lever and go right to the third class. In a third-class lever, we actually have the same setup as the second-class lever in terms of the axis being at one end of the lever system, and then the lever arm out here, and we have our two forces. But in this case, I'm switching these two forces. So we have the axis here, we have the motive force right here, and then a resistance force right here. So now I've got a different setup, axis, motive force, resistance force, set up in this orientation. There's some great mechanical examples as well of third-class levers. I'll actually just use the tweezers as one. So here's my tweezers, where this would be the axis of rotation right here. This, where I'm going to squeeze, will represent the motive force, and then whatever I'm trying to pick up out here at the end would provide the resistance force, pushing back against those two arms. So now I have a motive force where my fingers are, I have the axis of rotation where the tape is, and then the resistance force would just be out here. That's a third-class lever. So I'm drawing that out here. This is a set of tweezers. The resistance force provided by whatever is being picked up. The motive force being the fingers pushing on each arm of the tweezer, and then the axis of rotation. That's the same setup as this third-class lever. And that is a mechanical example of a third-class lever. There's lots of examples of a third-class lever in the human body. I'm going to use the elbow again, but this time I'm going to have the arm in this position. The microphone's in the way there. In this position, with the elbow being right here, the bicep brachii inserting on this side of the elbow, and then if I hold a weight, that would be the resistance force. So now I have elbow, motive force, bicep brachii, that's terrible spelling out here, brachii, that's two I's, and then the resistance force at the end, which would be the weight. So now I have that same setup of axis, motive force, resistance force, and that's a third-class lever. Lots of examples of third-class levers in the human body. An advantage of having our joint set up as a third-class lever is a very small displacement here close to the axis of rotation will actually cause a big displacement at the end. And so a lot of times you read, oh, our joints were built for speed, because we have very little displacement here, lots of displacement at the end, and therefore we would be moving faster, linearly faster at the end of the segment versus closer to the segment. And so a lot of people will say, references will say that we're built for speed, because we're able to move the ends of our segments faster for very little change in displacement at the near the elbow. So lots of examples of third class levers, and we'll go through those, and we'll do some more examples, and we'll do some strength training work on some other videos. So here's our 3 classes of levers. First class, the teeter-totter. 2 kids on the opposite side of the axis of rotation. One has to be considered the motive force causing action, the other is considered resistance force. Second class lever would be the wheelbarrow. Oh, and the anatomical example would be elbow extension, where the triceps are forcing extension, because the triceps insert on the electroproton process, which would be on the opposite side of the elbow joint in the hand. Second class lever, we're set up with this way: axis, resistance force, motive force. This would be the wheelbarrow. Not a lot of good examples in the human body. Third class lever, axis, motive force, resistance force. So you see how these are switched. Axis here, motive force, resistance force at the end. And this is a lot of our human joints are built this way. So if we're doing elbow flexion, we would have third class lever when we're doing elbow flexion like that. Okay, so know the 3 class levers, and a couple of examples for the first class and the third class. The tweezers would be an example of third class lever as well. And that's it for this video. Thanks, everybody.